Hi everybody, I'm Sheldon Fetty, I'm an alcoholic. It's great to be here. What an amazing conference so far. You guys having a great time? Really, the committee and everybody that's involved in putting this thing on, it's been very, very cool. I was up in my room getting ready to come down and talk, and I unpacked my suitcase last night, not paying attention, and I go to the closet and get my jacket and my shirt, and I don't have any pants. I call my wife. I go, honey, you know that part of the closet where I kind of put my stuff before I put it in the suitcase? Could you go and look and just see if not only my pants, but my pants and my tie are hanging there? She goes, yeah, they're right where you left them. Can't get them from Vegas to New Jersey in a couple of minutes. It's not going to work that way. So luckily my friend Ron lent me a tie. Thank you, Ron. Actually one that matches too. He must have had like 500 ties in his car. Just goes out and gets one that matches perfectly. But I am in black jeans from the podium, which I heard a couple of guys go, ooh. And I want you to know that I am properly ashamed of that. And if I've made you angry or upset or uptight about that in any way, thankfully we're going to do resentments today, so maybe by the end of my talk we can get you through it and over it and beyond it, and that's my hope today. That I apologize. It is not out of a lack of respect for Alcoholics Anonymous that I am not wearing my suit pants. It is out of clumsiness and foolishness, and I apologize for that. So anyway, step 4. God, when I was new, I'd go to an AA meeting and people would say you got to do the 4th step, and ooh, just wait till you do that thing. That 4th step, it's scary and it's frightening, and ooh, that's like the ooby-gooby of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. Just make sure you do it right, because if you do it wrong, it'll kill you. Which makes me really excited to do something that is difficult, scary, frightening, and might kill me. I mean, some of you are like, you know, tough guy motorcycle riders. That might get you excited, but I'm kind of pathetic, and I know I'm going to die if I got to do this thing, and I got to do it right. Not only, if you go to some meetings, oh my God, not only do you have to do a 4th step or you will die, you have to do it correctly and perfectly. And you have to put all the commas in the right place, and all the phrasing has to be accurate. And if you don't do it my way, I mean, you might have done it, but if you don't do it my way, you're going to die. And we're all going to die. And step 4 is like this thing. And hopefully we're going to talk a little bit today about how it's not like that at all. The nice thing about the Big Book is it gives us clear-cut directions on how to do this stuff, and it's really very easy, and the rewards from step 4 and step 5 can be phenomenal. But I want to talk a little bit about the technical way that I'm going to talk about doing the 4th step. And I want to tell you that if your sponsor has you do it a different way than I'm going to talk about, your sponsor's right? Because if anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous ever gives you any advice or tells you anything that contradicts your sponsor's your sponsor. And I've heard about 4-column inventories, and I've heard about 5-column inventories. I'm just an all-in kind of guy. I like to do a 6-column inventory, right? I've heard of my grand sponsor, who's helped more people on this planet, I think, than anybody else, doesn't even do any columns. He's got 5 questions that he asks guys. There are workbooks and worksheets and this way and that way. And one of the things that I think is important for all of us to remember is that what's important here is that we do an inventory. It's not important if you do it the way that I've been taught and I'm going to show you. In fact, Bill Wilson, in his story, you know, there's that amazing piece that we talk about sometimes in AA where Wilson has his spiritual experience on page 14, where it says, there was a sense of victory followed by such peace and serenity I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of the mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. Wilson has this, what we've come to call in AA, the Bill Wilson experience. And sometimes you'll hear people in AA, usually in their first 30 days, right, say, I had the Bill Wilson experience, right? And usually what they've actually had is lack of hangover and a good night's sleep, right? And that does feel really good. And it may be spiritual in some ways, right? But what happened to Bill, this experience that happened to him, didn't happen to him without the work. It happened to Bill as a result of the work. And on page 13, in fact, Bill Wilson recounts kind of how he did the work. And on page 13, before the spiritual experience, it says, I humbly offered myself to God as then understood him to do with me as he would. So Wilson does step 3, placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing. Without him, I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take me away root and branch, kind of a step 6 and 7. And then here's where he does step 4. Bill Wilson does step 4 and step 5. My schoolmate visited me and fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt and towards whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting I was wrong. And the reason that I read that is because I don't think in Towns Hospital, when Bill Wilson did that with Abby Thatcher, he did the perfect 4th step. Right? I think that by today's standards, some of the technicians and some of the people like me that give you the way that I do a 4th step, we'd look at what Wilson did in that hospital and go, are you kidding me? I don't know what that is, but it ain't a 4th step for crying out loud. Let's get in the book and dot the T's and make sure the commas are in the right place. But Wilson not only had a spiritual experience from doing his 4th step wrong, right? But he was also able to create this fellowship that saved my life. And so I think it's important for especially for the new people, for us all to understand that we've had a different experience. Some of us doing this step differently than each other. And there is no right or wrong way to do anything in AA as long as we're doing it, as long as we're taking the action and doing the action. So I encourage anybody that is new to get this done. Just get this done. Get it done wrong. Do it again if you think you didn't do it right, but just get the work done. So what happened to me is that I can't stop drinking, and I burn my life to the ground. And I'm a complete disaster, right? I can't hold a job. I'm living at my dad's house. I loved when Don was talking about ending up at mom's house. It's where we all end up. I ended up at dad's house. Dad had one rule. We know the rule. Dad's rule was even more liberal than Don's mom's rule. My dad's rule was, if you got to drink, drink, come home drunk. Just don't bring it in my house. I had two stepsisters, two stepdaughters that were 11 and 13, and he just didn't want me bringing booze and dope in the house. That was his only request. And I couldn't even stick to that, right? I couldn't even stick to that. I left the TV on one day when I passed out on my bed. He came in the room, not to check on me, but to turn the TV off. And I got bottles and other paraphernalia by the bed, and I get thrown out of Dad's house. And now I'm in a halfway house, and I'm there for 30 days. And you know, the problem with a halfway house is rules. For a guy like me, they wanted to tell me what time I should come home, right? I'm a grown man. What are you telling me, right? They wanted me to do chores, which is just... 2 years previously, I was the national spokesperson for Kenwood Appliances. Now Petey the plumber wants to tell me to clean the bathroom, right? I mean, not for nothing, but Petey, clean your own bathroom, right? You know? And I moved out of that, and I can't stay sober. And I'm getting sober to get drunk, to get sober to get drunk, and I'm getting 3 days, 5 days, 8 days, 10 days, and I'm coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. In the first couple of years, I did this for 3 or 4 years. The first year or maybe 2 years, I don't even think I wanted to be sober, right? I think what I wanted was I wanted the heat off. I wanted Dad to talk to me again, because Dad was a soft touch. When I couldn't pay the rent, he was always good for a couple $100 to help me. And Dad would help me more if I was going to meetings. right? So I don't think I really wanted to get sober. I wanted Dad's help, my boss. When you don't show up for work on Monday, halfway through Tuesday, and you go to work and you cry and you say, I did it again, boss, but I'm going back to those meetings. My boss would let me off the hook, so that's what I wanted. I wanted the heat off, the pressure off. But after a couple of years of going in and out of AA, it's exhausting, right? I get 4 or 5 days and then that feeling opens up in me that Rich is talking about, this uncomfortable, that you can't even, like, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's like I'm upset and I'm frustrated and I'm tense and I just need a break is all I need. And I don't intend on getting drunk. It had been a long time since what I needed was to be able to breathe. So I'm not going to get drunk. I'm going to have 1, maybe 2, right? 3 at the most. No more than 4, right? I mean, but the problem is that I have that 4th drink and then this mystical phenomenon of craving occurs, right? And the way it occurs is I change my mind and have 5, right? And now I'm on a runner again and and then I show back and I go in and out of AA. And I want to quit drinking, and I don't want to live like this anymore. But I tell you, somewhere between 5 and 30 days, I am so uncomfortable sober that I got to do something. We're going to do a countdown tonight, and there are people in the room I know that have over 40 years of sobriety, over 40 years. Which from my perspective, I'm sober since July of '96. I'm 21 years sober. It is amazing for me to imagine someone being 40 years sober. When I was new, I thought, you poor bastard, right? I mean, seriously. Could you imagine feeling new for 40 years? Right? I mean, I get to 25, 30 days feeling sober and I got to do something. My perspective of what it must be like to be 40 years sober is that for 40 years you've been, I'm just not going to drink, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to drink. My life is miserable and everything sucks and you suck and I hate my mom and I hate my dad and I hate my boss and I hate you. I hate everybody and everything and whatever. But I'm going to be sober and I'm going to do it for 40 years. Oh, God, that hurts just thinking about it, right? So for me, what you offer me in AA doesn't feel like it's good news. And you ever tell anyone, you go to one of the old timers and you go, this being sober just hurts so much and I just can't imagine being sober forever. Ever. And they say, don't worry. In AA, we don't stay sober forever. We stay sober 1 day at a time. You can do it, Punky. 1 day at a time. And what that sounds like to me is a prison sentence, right? 1 day at a time. 1 long, miserable, painful day at a time. It's not good news. And if you tell them that, they go, well, you can just stay sober 1 hour at a time. 60 miserable minutes. Because my perspective of staying sober is what it feels like for me to be new. And so I got to do something. I got to take some action for me to relieve the way that I feel newly sober, because if this is what you offer, I'm not a player long term. I want to be. I'm not trying to be like, well then to heck with you. I want to be a player long term. But I know I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to stay here feeling the way that I feel long term. So they tell me I got to take these steps. And step 2, what a beautiful job Don did is step 2. Step 2 for me, what I thought they were telling me was impossible. That I got to believe in God. I can't believe in God. I don't believe. You want me to lie and say I believe in God? I don't believe in God. Right? To me, it's a fairy tale and a myth. Someone said it earlier on, I think Tom mentioned it today. My mom used to use that phrase where she'd say it's the opiate of the masses. It's for fools and children. I grew up in a Jewish home, but we weren't really Jews. We were atheist Jews is what we were, right? And what that means is that we're Jews, we just know we're wrong. And the only people on the planet that are more wrong than us are our crazy Christian neighbors. I just want to point out that some of you laughed at the Jew joke and you didn't laugh at the Christian joke. You've got some work to do, my friends. But we would do all the rituals, right? We'd have the parties and we'd have the special meals and I got bar mitzvah and we'd have Seder night and we'd do all that stuff. But there was no real, it was empty. I grew up in a sect of Judaism that is quite strict and you had to walk to temple. You couldn't drive. When I moved to America, I was born and raised in England. When I moved to America, to see shuls or temples with parking lots was just bizarre to me. Like, what do you need one of those for? You can't bring your car. Do you rent it out to the Elks or something so they could, because we don't drive, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. What a waste of space, right? We lived 5 miles from the temple. And every morning, the good Jews, every Shabbos morning, every Saturday morning, the good Jews, the 5-mile Jews, I call them, they would get up and walk 5 miles to temple. They were the 5-mile Jews. We were 3-block Jews. We'd take the bus to around the corner, make ourselves look tired, and walk the last 3 blocks. Oh, hot today, isn't it? You know? I was a 3. I'm a 5-block member of Alcoholics Anonymous, by the way. I'm a 5-block member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was never a 5-block. So I get here, and you want me to believe in God, and I can't do my God, and I can't do your God. And it was very difficult for me. You know, you can imagine, you know, you come now, and this is my own arrogance, and it may not be true, and I apologize if it isn't, but my own arrogance says, when you come here because you don't it's a Christian country, it's what it is, and you don't feel that unless you're not a Christian, but it's a Christian country. And when you get sober in a Christian country and people say God as you understand him, who do you think you're kidding? Right? We know who you mean. We know who expresses what in whose group conscience. I'm one vote. There's more of you than me, right? I mean, I know who you're talking about, you know, and some of you think my ancestors killed him. So it's really, it's just a bad deal for me. It's just a bad deal, right? So it's very difficult for me to do that, right? It's just hard, and I don't believe in God, and I'm finally sober, so I don't want to be a hypocrite anymore. So I've been one all my life, but now I'm sober, right? So I don't. But it was explained to me this way. And in step 2, all we do is suspend our right to have an opinion about God. That in step 12 it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, and that all I have to do is get off the debating team. I love how Don phrased it. It's that question in the book where it says, I have to ask myself but one simple question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe in a power greater than myself? That's all I got to do step 2. And I don't believe. But do I think it's possible, but maybe there might be a God, as unlikely as it seems from where I stand? I mean, I suppose anything's possible, right? Who knows? I doubt it, but maybe, right? Maybe. Unlikely. If you push, the answer's no. So don't push, right? Don't push. But I suppose it's possible, right? I mean, anything's possible, right? Who knows, right? So anyway, so I'm done now with step 2 because I've said anything's possible, right? And I've learned this stuff in 60 through 63 that says that I'm selfish and self-centered. And if you're like me, when my sponsor says, I want you to read 60 through 63 a half a dozen times, and we're going to talk about it, and we talk about it, I mean, I get it in theory, kind of. I tell you this, I know that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my trouble. I know that. But what I know is that it's your selfishness and your self-centeredness that's really kicking my butt. It's not mine, right? The truth of the matter is that I drink because my dad left when I was 2 years old. That's why I drink. I drink because when my dad left, we moved from a nice neighborhood in the right side of town, in a middle-class neighborhood, in a Jewish neighborhood. We moved to Section 8 housing, and my mom signed on welfare, and we got food stamps. And I moved to a non-Jewish neighborhood with a lot of anti-Semitism, and I used to get in fights every single day when I was a kid because of racism and prejudice. And I tell you, that's why I drink. And that is not my fault, and it's not my selfishness, nor is it my self-centeredness. And I didn't do it, and I didn't create it, and it's my dad's fault. And if you want to know why I drink, it's because of my dad. But okay, spons. If only people would do as I wished. You're damn right. You're damn right if only people would do as I wish. Because I have suffered, right? At that boss of mine, that son of a gun that didn't, I don't know why he didn't like me, but it was clear he was treating me different than he was treating everybody else. I mean, her, right? I mean, I liked her. I did. She broke my heart. I mean, she crushed me, right? That's why, you want to know why I drink? But okay, selfishness, self-centeredness. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say the prayer, and then maybe you'll get off my back. And that's how I took step 3. I mean, how else am I going to take step 3 if I don't really believe in God? And my sponsor encouraged that, because if he would have said to me, Sheldon, you have to come to believe before you say the prayer, I still wouldn't have said the prayer, because there was action that had to happen, things that had to occur in my sobriety. Step 4 and 5 being a big piece of that, but not the only piece of it, but a big piece of that for me to come to believe. So it was just say the prayer. Believe that I believe and say the prayer. So I believed that he believed and I said the prayer. And then we got to work on writing an inventory. Because I had been sober before, and I told him this. I had done the AA waltz. All right, 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, drink. I'd been doing that dance for a couple of 3 years, and I'm not very graceful. And I drink, and when I drink hard, and then I show back up again saying, help me. Right? And it was explained to me, Sheldon, you're in a 12-step program. If you're not doing the 12 steps, what are you doing? Right? It's all we got. I love when Rich said that. That's what we got. Now, along with that comes a lot more. And I don't think, and this is heresy. I'm going to get, effigies of me shall be burned after the meeting. Because I don't believe that the 12 steps alone will keep me sober. I don't. I believe that because of the work I've done in the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that a fellowship around me has grown up that is magical, that has saved my butt. Like when my butt's falling off, I run to the fellowship first. The fellowship catches me and loves me and holds me and then says, well, we got some 10-step work to do there. Or, well, let's look at step 6, right? And then the service. Now, service, boy, that is part of the steps, right? That's step 12. But the fellowship and the whole triangle, the whole thing is what was required for me to stay sober. But this fourth step was a magical experience for me. Magical experience for me. So here's what happens to me is that I'm trying to stay sober and I'm just not drinking because that's what I think you want me to do. And it's pointed out to me that if I'm going to stay sober, I love this line where it says that next we launched, after the third step prayer, it says, next we launched on the course of vigorous action. So if you're new and you're wondering how long you should wait to do your fourth step, I wanted to wait. I wanted to do a step a year. Right? I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard that. For do 1 step a year. Here's my favorite AA slogan. Slow is real. Could you imagine if you got diagnosed with cancer, the doctor said, I want you to go to the hospital right now, and you said to the doc, well, listen, doc, I mean, I know that I need the chemo and the radiation, but slow is real. I'm going to get through it next year. We're going to do this. We're going to do them, but we're going to do them next year. The book says next we launched, right? Now, launch brings to my mind 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Like it's a quick thing, right? We launch. You can't launch slowly, right? You'd have to pick a new word, right? Like, right? You couldn't, right? Next week, right? Don't say that, does it? You could, the slowest you could launch is 10, 9. But you're still going to launch, right? So next we launch on the course of vigorous action. We're going to do something. It's going to be vigorous action. It's a vigorous action. And the first step of which is this house cleaning that none of us have ever attempted. We've never done this. Now, this is important because I've done the first 3 columns when we get to talk about the actual image. I've sat around and thought about who they are. I know who they are. And I know what they did. Right? I know the first column and I know the second column, and I know how that made me feel. Right? And I tell you, I've laid awake at night dreaming about that. I've sat at bars crying about that. If I can get your attention for 5 minutes, I'm going to say, hi, I'm Sheldon, what's your name? Oh, that's nice. Listen, let me tell you what my dad did and how that made me suffer. All right? I mean, it's who I am. The first 3 columns are my identity. But what we're going to do is we're going to have an effort to discover, the book says, discover new information. New information. I'm going to find out things about me that are new in this inventory. And boy, did I. Boy, did I. Because this book says here that resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. I'm sure in a group like this, you don't typically, unless you're a drug here by your sponsor, you only come to an event like this if you're a 5%er, if you're doing everything in AA, right? And this room is filled with the treatment center, detox, jail-going people of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? My peeps are here, aren't you? You guys are here? Yeah, right? So when we go there and we see the guy that's going in and out and in and out, and you say to him, what happened? I mean, it's a stupid question. We know what happened. It's called alcoholism, right? But we placate him and we have, what happened? Right? And they always have a story of someone they're mad at, right? Usually it's her. Well, she did this and rah, 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 rah. Oh, the boss. While I was at work and I got fired and rah, 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 rah. Oh, that cop. Rah, 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 rah. Right, but usually it's someone they're mad at that has put them in a state where they go, well then, so screw it. All right, and we go drink. Now, what I don't know is that I am angst looking for something to be angst at. That is what I am. I am fear searching for something to be afraid of. If you leave me in a state of untreated alcoholism, the reason that I go crazy is because I wake up in the morning primarily afraid. Primarily afraid. And when you wake up afraid, your ego says, okay, we're afraid. Now we need something to be afraid of. So I start searching my life for something to be afraid of. And when you put that kind of a magnifying glass on any life, you're going to find stuff to be afraid of. And the minute I'm afraid, then what happens is I get angry. I knew it. I should have been afraid. That's what I'm afraid of, and I hate that person. And I get this angst and this uncomfortability and this loneliness and this, and then I just need some relief from that. I just need some relief from that. It is the separateness from you and from God caused by the fear and the anger that drives me into this state of anxiety that makes me drink again and again and again. When this book says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And boy, I've seen that 100 times. I'm sure you have too. I've seen that so many times in Alcoholics Anonymous when you see somebody that comes in, and sometimes when we show up, we look haggard, don't we? Right? Our skin is gray, and our eyes are sunk in, and we can't form sentences. You try and talk to someone when they're brand new, and you just think, oh my God, they make no sense at all, right? And then you watch them go through the process, and often it's a different person stood in front of you a year or two later than that person was that was new. That person was that was new. So what do we do about it? How am I going to overcome all this stuff? I mean, if selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my trouble, if self-centered fear is what is underlying the selfishness and the self-centeredness, if really what I am is wrapped up in the bondage of self, which I still don't really understand. I get stuck on the word bondage, and I can't think beyond that word, right? It's just who I am, right? But if that's really what's going on with me, is that so I'm going to fix it, right? How am I going to fix it? Well, I'm just not going to be selfish anymore. I won't be selfish. There'll be no more selfishness here. I will not be selfish, nor will I be afraid. I will not be afraid, and I will not be selfish. From this point forwards, Sheldon will not be selfish. I'm not being selfish. Am I being selfish? I wonder if I'm being selfish. Is this selfish? Was that selfish? He's being selfish. And I get locked in self about wondering whether or not you ever meet the new guy that just first learned selfishness is his problem, right? And it's like he's obsessed with how selfish he and everybody else is, and that's selfish. I'm caught in this box. So there's got to be something that I can do about it. What can I do about it? And the book gives me this clear-cut directions on what to do. It says that first of all, we asked ourselves why we listed the people, institutions, and principles with whom we were angry. Now, we all are like, think we're special, all right? It's, my grand sponsor says the one thing that we all agree on, that where we're the same, is that we're all different, right? But we're not. We're all uniquely identical is what we are. And I'm stuck on my false step, and I shouldn't be, because you could have written the list for me. If you're new, I could write your resentment list for you. I know that surprises you, but think about it, right? It's dad, mom, right? Current spouse, right? Brother, sister, previous spouse, current employer, previous employer, uncles, aunts, and then it trickles down to anybody that has had any meaningless contact with you since you were born. I got sober, I was 28 years old. And on my inventory list, real square business, an honest resentment, one of the people I hated the most was the lunch lady from when I was 6. And I tell you, I still haven't really worked through that one. I mean, something about the way she went, right? But everybody's on the list, right? But the first two names on my list were my dad and my mom. I hated my dad. My dad left when I was 2 years old. When I was 2 years old, him and my mom split, and before he split, we had a nice little house in a nice Jewish neighborhood on the right side of the tracks. And when he left, we obviously lost the house, and we moved into the wrong side of the tracks, into Section 8 housing. They don't call it that in England. They call it a welfare house. But we moved into a welfare house. My mom signed on the dole. We became that family. We became that family. And in that neighborhood, maybe not so much anymore, but much more than in America. In England, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. Everybody lost someone in the Second World War. Bombs fell on the homeland, and it felt like the reaction to that was all these people died trying to save them Jews, and we were one of them Jews. And it was very difficult for me growing up as a kid. And this is where you go, ah. Thank you, right? So it's very difficult. I was in a non-Jewish neighborhood. There's a lot of anti-Semitism, and I felt it. And then back in that community, in that Jewish community, we were like the lepers, because in that small Jewish community, I'm older than I think I am, 47 years ago, divorce wasn't as popular as it is today. Right? And you were looked at as an outcast. You were looked at as if, you know, you were the lepers in the colony, for crying out loud. So I didn't fit in my community, I didn't fit in that, and I hate my dad. This was all my dad's fault. And I hate my dad for doing that. My mom's the next name on the list, and I hate my mom because my mom screams and yells a lot. My mom's one of those people that when you come home from school, you don't know how she's gonna be, right? You might have had a really good day of behavior. I mean, I never did, but it's possible, I guess, right? I mean, that's my theory anyways, that I could have had a good day of behavior, but she might have yelled and screamed. You might have gotten in trouble, and it might not have mattered. You couldn't gauge your reaction by, it didn't make any sense, and she would scream and yell a lot, and she's this big, and she was a small giant, right, and belts, and not real bad, but in my mind, she was, what do you expect me to be like? Growing up with this woman after that guy left, and just I hated him. I hated him. I write the list. Then it says we asked ourselves why we were angry. So the first column is mom and dad. Second column is what they did. Dad left. Mom didn't love me properly, right? It's not really what I wrote, but it's what it boils down. I wrote, dad left, ruined my life, took me out of the nice neighborhood. Mom screams and yells, didn't feel secure, safe at home, didn't feel the love that I thought I should have. What's affected? What's affected? There's a great list here. It says, what is it? Security, ambition, personal, sexual relations. It was everything with those two names. It was everything. Everything was affected. Everything was affected. I write this list, and obviously I've got a lot more than just those two names on it, but those are the two big names that are on the list. I've got my brother's name on there, all my aunts and uncles. I've got certain teachers from school on there. I've got bosses that I've had on there. I have entire communities. I have the entire Jewish community for rejecting me on the list. Every Jew in the world, everyone on the planet. Right? So if you're in this room and you're a Jew, you were on the list. I also have on there all the Goyim, everyone who's not Jewish. So if you're in this room and you're not Jewish, you were also, in fact, I hated all of you. You were both on the list. But I've got all these people, and I hate everybody. My sponsor did something for me that I have done for many of the guys that I sponsor, not all of them, not every time, but often. Which is why I started out by telling you that, boy, there is in my mind, and it's just one man's opinion, there is no way to put the commas in the right place on the inventory, right? Because every inventory I've done, it seems like it has a little different flavor depending on the guy I'm doing it with. But what my sponsor said to me was, I want you to write those first 3 columns, and then I want you to bring them to me, and in your 5th step, we will finish your 4th step, which is a little untraditional, but it's what he did for me, and I'm glad he did it that way, because there were things that were going to be impossible for me to do. And I'm glad he was willing to take my hand and do that with me. So we kind of did 4 and 5 kind of blurred together in this area a little bit for me. Because the next thing that it asked me to do, on the bottom of page 66 is this line where it says, this was our cost. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And I was told to write a 4th column of how I'm like these people. If I was in their shoes, if I was in my dad's shoes, is it possible I would have behaved the way my dad behaved? If I was in my mom's shoes, is it possible I would have done what my mom did? If I was in my boss's shoes, the people that I'm so angry at, is it possible that I could have behaved the way that they behaved? Is that possible? And you know what's funny? Is that almost without exception, I can say, you know, if I was afraid like they were afraid, if I had been raised the way that they were raised, if I had been chased and chastised by somebody the way I chased and chastised them, if I'd been let down, disappointed, and frustrated by maybe not just by me, but by the other circumstances in their life, if I was in their shoes, could I have done what they did? Could I have done what they did? And if I can't see that I could have done what they did, could I ask myself if I was spiritually sick like they were spiritually sick? Because the book's very clear that we don't have a monopoly on spiritual sickness, right? Sometimes in AA, we're so arrogant. You know, alcoholics are just sicker than everybody else on the planet, right? We're very strange people. We just think that everybody else has problems, but we have alcoholism, which is just terrible, right? we have one of the spiritual maladies, right? We have a spiritual malady treated by alcohol, which makes us wet our pants, which is an embarrassing version of spiritual sickness, but not the only kind. And is it possible that if I was spiritually sick like they're spiritually sick, is it possible if I was them? And with most of them, I could see that was possible. But with my mom and my dad, I couldn't. I couldn't imagine. I was 2 years old. I mean, you get down to, people say, you know, your dad, I love this one, your dad did the best for you that he could with the tools he had at his disposal. I'm thinking, get new tools. You know, you're a grown man, you're a father, you're a parent, you have responsibilities, you're an adult for crying out loud, right? You need to do the right thing and figure out how to raise me. I was 2, it wasn't my fault. I could not let my dad off the hook, there was no way. What about my mom? It's hard for me to let my mom off the hook. But my sponsor asked me some very difficult questions. He said, let me ask you a question, Sheldon. What do you think it would have been like for you if you'd have been stuck with 2 young kids at her young age? What do you think it would have been like for you if you had to do that? What do you think it was? Let's even ask a further question, something I had never considered. This is something that now you want to talk about levels of selfishness that exist within me, something I'd never considered. Here's a great question. Not what would it have been like for you, what was it like for her? What was it really like for her? Can you imagine what that would have been like? To have to move out of the community that you were raised in into that welfare family, that welfare situation. To raise 2 young boys when you thought you were going to have a family and you thought you were going to, you know, follow the path of the people around you and your schoolmates and your friends and the other people in the community. What was it like for her to have to raise those kids on her own? The embarrassment and humiliation of being one of the only Jewish families, you know, with a small group of Jewish families to get a divorce. What was it like for her? And if you had had something like that happen to you, how might you have reacted? Huh. I don't want to think about it. I mean, I'm the guy that stubs his toe and wants you to call an ambulance, right? I'm the guy that if I'm at a meeting, 21 years sober, I'm at a meeting and you walk in the room and you don't notice me and say hello, I have to write an inventory about it. Hey, Spons, can I grab you real quick? Was at a meeting with Billy the other day. Billy didn't say hi. Here's what it affected, right? I mean, I'm kind of pathetic, right? To be in her situation with that level of difficulty and that I might have yelled and screamed a little. I might have been a little short-tempered. I might not have been able to show up with the love that I believe that she should have been able to show up. I might have not been able. And for the first time, I'm thinking about my mom in my mom's life, not as my mom, but as her. What was her life like? I never considered it. Never considered it. And how might I have behaved if I was her? And for the first time ever, this crack starts to form in this wall I have written about my mom, this story I have written. Because here's what I do. I don't know if you do this, this is what I do. I like to get 10% of the information and then make up the rest of the story. All right? That's what I like to do. I know very little about you, but pretty soon I know everything about you because I've sat with guys in meetings for a decade. And then we sit and have our first real conversation. I go, oh man, I never imagined that about you. And trust me, I imagined things about them, right? I mean, I knew it, right? But I just make up stories is what I do. I get a little, and I never make up love stories, right? If I met you and I knew a few things about you and then the rest of the story I made up was, and he's a great family man and he treats his kids really well and he's got great dogs and he takes them for walks and he feeds the homeless and that wouldn't be so bad. But that's not what I do. This is the story I make up is, well, he looks good in AA. But I'm sure when he gets home, he slaps her around a little bit, kicks the dog, he's stealing, he cheats on his taxes, and he's steals his neighbor's newspaper. I know his type, all right? So I've got some of the information about my mom, and I've made up the rest, and I've created this person that doesn't exist for me to hate. For me to hate. And for the first time, I start to imagine what it might have been like for her to be her. It says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. That's such a beautiful line. Putting out of the, because when I was doing my inventory with my sponsor, and I've had this experience with guys that I sponsor, maybe you've had this experience, where I'm doing this, and I say to them, well, what was it like do you think, for your mom? He says, what do you think it was like? I said, well, it was probably pretty hard for her to be her, but she would yell. Did you get the fact that she yelled and screamed a lot? And he'd have to remind me, putting out of your mind anything that she had done. Putting out of your mind anything that she might have done. Let's look for what we may have done. Let's look for our selfishness. Where have we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? And I'd never considered anything that I might have done, but what had I done? Where was I selfish? Well, I'd never considered what it might have been like to be my mom. I had only ever considered what it was like to be her son. I had never even entered my mind what it might have been like to be her and how difficult her life would be. In fact, I didn't care. In fact, for her to make me happy, she should have made her life more difficult, right? Any joy she was able to steal was joy she stole from me, right? Anything she did for my brother, I hated my brother, right? Because he seemed to get more than me. Where was I selfish, dishonest? My mom, in order to give us the best lifestyle that she could, my mom was not an educated woman. And she couldn't work on the books because my dad was sending some support, but not very much. And so we were getting some government assistance. And in order for her to get a little more for the family, she had to work off the books, under the table. And the only way that she could do that was she went to the women she went to school with, middle school and high school, and she asked them if she could work as a domestic in their home. Which was, my reaction to that was how embarrassing. I might be at one of those kids' houses and she'd show up with a mop and a bucket. And I'd get mad at her. Mom, could you at least tell me when you're doing Jimmy's house so I don't have to be here? We could have been at Dave's house, you know. Everybody knows you're my mother, for God's sakes. So I'm selfish because I'm embarrassed by her, and I'm dishonest because I'm not willing to say how amazing that was that she would do that. I call it embarrassing instead of amazing. And I start to get a little crack in the eyes. The book asked me what I did wrong. Though the situation wasn't entirely our fault, and it wasn't, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? Where were we to blame? If my mom had been a perfect mom, what kind of son was I? Not a very good one. Yeah. I'd steal from her. I'd talk back to her. As soon as I was tall enough to not be afraid of her, I let her know I wasn't afraid of her. I was disrespectful. She couldn't ever have any kind of a relationship because I was a rotten kid. And you try and bring a boyfriend into the house when I'm there, and any man is going to want to try to stand up in that situation. And then you get the "you're not my father" routine, and then they fight about, you know, you can't treat my kid. I mean, I made it impossible for her to have a relationship. Absolutely impossible for her to have a relationship. Where was I to blame? When I grew up out of the home and I went off to do my thing, I wasn't in contact with her. I didn't let her know a baby boy was okay. I built cases about her. I told stories about her that weren't true. Here's just a woman that's in a difficult situation, trying her best to raise 2 boys, and I'm disrespectful and dishonest and selfish and self-centered, and I've created this image of her that doesn't exist. Really important. It says it twice. One line it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. There's one time where it says, we put out of our minds what they've done. The other line that it says is, we disregard the other person involved entirely. You know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, somewhere along the line, we brought in some verbiage that I think can be quite dangerous unless we understand its danger. And we tell people to look for their part. You need to look for your part. Well, I have a problem with that because the word part insinuates something, doesn't it? That there's this big piece and you have a part, all right? You have a part. If you're going to look at your part, you have to disregard the other person's part entirely. The only way for me to get free is to take full responsibility, for me to own it. You know, the good news in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I showed up here a victim, and victims stay sick. You know, it's funny, if you're here long enough, you can have a conversation with someone and very quickly you can figure out where they're at in the process. And that sounds strange, doesn't it? But there's a defining rod. If I'm talking to you and you're telling me about your problems and it's what they did and then they did this and then they did that and you won't believe it, and oh my God, I tell you what, it's just not fair the way they treat me. I know that if you've done a full step, it's been a while and you probably need to do a new one. But if you say to me, you know, life's tough, I'm trying to do this, I failed at that, it's not that easy, but I'm doing the best I can, and with God's help, then I know that you're on the right track, because we turn victims into volunteers in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what we do. We turn victims into volunteers. And a volunteer, if it's your fault, you can fix it with God's help. If it's not your fault, you have to wait for the other person to change, which doesn't happen. So we turn victims into volunteers in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the magic of what happens here. So let's talk about my dad, because my sponsor wanted to talk about my dad earlier, and I said, I'm not talking about my dad, there's no way. But I have this revelation about my mom, about how really she was just this woman that was trying to do her best. And she was in a bad situation, and I may have reacted the way she reacted, and I can understand a little bit what it might have been like to be her. So we go to my dad, and he says, what about your dad? What about him? What about him? Well, what if you were in your dad's shoes? What? What if I was? So what do you think when your mom and dad got married? Is it possible? And he played a game of is it possible? Is it possible that your mom and dad got married quickly, quicker than they might have done if they weren't in a small Jewish community just after the war? That they were encouraged to get married quickly because that's what people did in those days and they didn't really know each other. Is that possible? I suppose that's possible. Is it possible that after your dad married her, he figured out that she was this woman that can sometimes get, you know, angry and have panic attacks, and she did, and she suffered from that all of her life? Is it possible that he could have found himself in a bad marriage that he didn't want to be in and he was unhappy? Is that possible? Yeah. Is it possible that she got pregnant with your older brother and he would have left, but he did the honorable thing and stayed because that's what you do, and he stayed as long as he could. He stayed as long as he could, and maybe he would have left again, but then she got pregnant with you. And he found himself with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old in a very difficult, painful situation, thinking about the fact that the rest of his life he was not going to have any happiness again at all. And the only thing that he could do was leave, and he didn't want to leave, but he left, and when he left, he didn't leave town and stay in your hometown, which is what I wanted him to do. I wanted him to be part of our life and stay in our town. I dig it if we're going to leave Mom, but why'd you leave me too? Because he left and he went from Leeds to London, London to Canada, Canada to Southern California, and that's where he eventually settled. You know, why'd you have to move 6,000 miles away? But maybe is it possible that he did that so your mom could maintain her dignity? That when he left town altogether, never to see his mom and his dad again. He saw him, but not to live in the same town. Not to live in the same town as his brothers ever again. To leave everything he knew and loved about his life. So when people said what happened in that marriage, they could point the finger at him and he wouldn't have to defend himself and he wouldn't have to talk about your mom. And is it possible that he just left because it was the cleanest way to do it? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You built your whole life on a story that you're absolutely certain of. What do you mean you don't know? I don't know. I don't know. Is it possible? I suppose it's possible. What would you have done if you were your dad? 16 years old, I went down to the local government with mud on my face and a backpack full of clothes and lied to them and said my mom had thrown me out so I could become an emancipated adult, sign on welfare, and get my own apartment because I couldn't stand to live with her anymore. What would I have done if I was my dad? I'd have shown up and she'd have said she was pregnant with my older brother and I would have said, good luck with that, lady. And I'd have split. What would I have done? Now, I don't know for sure if any of this or all of this is true, but I can see that my dad, where am I selfish? What I really wanted, this is what I wanted. I wanted my dad to never, ever have another day of happiness again in his life if that's what it took for him to stay in that house and be my dad. I did not care for 1 minute if he was happy, not for 1 minute. I wasn't interested. It didn't matter. What I cared about was that he paid the penance of being my father and stayed in that town, in that house and raised me. That's what I thought. I did not care if he was happy at all. Where was I dishonest? This gets complicated. This gets complicated. Because I will tell you that the very worst thing my dad ever did was leave me when I was 2 years old. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. The worst thing that ever happened to me. But I don't know nothing. See, if you ask me about my life today, I'll tell you about my life today. And if you're new, you're going to be very happy for me. I have a great life. I've been married to my wife. We just celebrated 19 years. We met in Alcoholics Anonymous. She's a great woman. It is a good marriage. I have a 16-year-old son. He's a well-behaved kid. He's a brat, but he's 16, right? But he's a great brat. He's my brat. He's funny and he's smart and he's part of the family and he wants to be part of the family. And when people meet him, he's respectful and he's all joking aside, he is a magical boy. He really is. He's an amazing kid. I've had a brilliant career. I actually got to retire. Well, I didn't really retire. I took a sabbatical for 3 years. Took 3 years off. We did so well. And I got to hang out with my son from 12 to 15 and be a stay-at-home dad. And then now I've gone back to work and I'm doing it for myself. I just opened my own company 4 months ago. And I'm now doing the business that I've known so well. I'm now doing it for myself. And I'm telling you, it's scary and it's difficult and it's frustrating, but it's exciting and I love it. What I want you to know is that I love my life. I have great friends in Alcoholics Anonymous. I sponsor a bunch of guys. I have a sponsor. I've got community. My life is amazing. Why? Why is my life the way it is? You think I'm going to say because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Has played a big part. But the reason my life is the way it is because my dad left when I was 2 years old. That is why my life is the way it is. Because when my dad left when I was 2 years old, he left Leeds to London, London to Canada, Canada to Southern California. When I was 16 and a half, I was a disaster, and they shipped me out to my dad, and I went to live with my dad. Lived with him for 2 years. He taught me how to sell. I had some natural ability. He was a great salesman, and he taught me, and he honed those skills, and he taught me how to sell, and he created the career that I have today, and he gave me that gift. And then we got in a fight. and I moved to Vegas. And because I moved to Vegas, I found my home group in Las Vegas, got sober in Las Vegas, met my wife in Las Vegas, had my son in Las Vegas, and my business is in Las Vegas. And the reason I'm in Las Vegas is because my dad left when I was 2 years old. How dishonest a person could I be? If my dad hadn't left, I might have a different wife. She might be cool. I sponsor enough guys to know she might not be. I might have a different kid, but I tell you, he may be cool, but he may not be. A different career. Who knows what my life would be like? My life exists today because my dad left when I was 2 years old. And I am so dishonest and so shallow and so limited in my thinking that I cannot see the amazing miracles that God has done in my life in spite of the things that I think are terrible. Isn't that crazy? Where am I dishonest, self-seeking, afraid, driven by all of it? What have I done? What have I done wrong? Well, I've talked crap about my dad and to my dad anytime he'd listen or anybody else would listen. I've slandered his character. I've not been a good son. I've been disrespectful. I've stolen from him. I've done everything a man can do to another man to make him feel small and ashamed. I've done to that man. I've done to that man. If he was a perfect father, what kind of son have I been? So I come out of this inventory seeing that I don't really know. And that's the magic of this, is that I think I know. I think I know today, and I don't know. Is it possible? Is it possible that I'm wrong? Is it possible in God's universe that everything is the way it's supposed to be? Why? Because it's God's universe. Is that possible? Is it possible that the only thing wrong with my life is my judgment of it? I start to learn the lesson of step 6 in step 5. Through this conversation with my sponsor. In step 4, through writing this stuff out, I start to learn this lesson. I start to get free of the things that are killing me. Now, I don't get free and I don't stay free, and I know that's not going to happen because that's why step 10 and 11 exist, because I am my own jailer and I will sentence myself to another stint in the clink, boy. I will. But I start to see the truth, and the truth is that I don't know. I don't know any of the things I think I know about any of the people that I'm absolutely certain that I know. I just don't know. I just don't know. And I write this fear inventory. I go through my resentments and I find the fears and I write this fear inventory. And what becomes apparent to me, and this is, I never knew this. This is new information. What becomes apparent to me is that I'm not really angry. What I really am is I'm afraid. I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid, listen, I dig it. I'm afraid of barking dogs and big spiders too. But that's not the stuff that makes me drink. I've never gone, oh my God, a big dog, give me a scotch, right? I mean, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of what you think of me. I'm afraid when you look at me, what do you see? Because I don't know what I see when I look at me. I don't know. Some days I look at me and I think I'm better and brighter and smarter than you. And other days I look at me and I think I'm weaker and smaller and insignificant. And I am terrified of what you think of me. And I am certain what you think of me isn't good. And I'm even more afraid that you'll be right. So I walk around this planet reacting to what I think people think of me. Imagining I should be different. Watching how you behave, forgetting that you're just trying your best to behave confident and cool, forgetting you're afraid, and reacting to it. Afraid that I won't have any money, afraid I won't be safe or secure, afraid I won't get that promotion, afraid I won't get that fancy car, afraid. And what do? I look for people to blame for my fear. I wake up in the morning afraid. That's how I wake up. I have a laser beam of I should be afraid. Now let me find something to be afraid of. All right? And once I find that thing to be afraid of, then I can build a resentment against that thing I'm afraid of. With my mom, I was afraid that she didn't love me. That's what I was afraid of. I was afraid that the reason she treated me the way she did was because she didn't love me. I'm a liar. That's not why. She treated me the way she treated me because she was in a bad situation and didn't have what it took, as nobody would. Not like nobody could in that bad situation be perfect all the time. And I was afraid she didn't love me. I was afraid my dad left This is what I was really afraid of. I picture in my mind that my mom and dad got married, they were happy. My brother was born, they were happy. Then I came along, ruined everything. I was afraid my dad didn't love me. I was afraid I ruined the family. I was afraid that people would know that I'm that kid. I was afraid. Afraid my boss didn't respect me. Afraid that girl wouldn't like me. Afraid that you were going to judge me. And then my reaction to the fear, which is half resentment and half judgment and just noise, makes me not fit in the universe with you. And I most of all want to connect. That's what I really want. Is I want to feel connected, but how can you connect with something you're in judgment of? And I'm lost. And I'm lost. In the middle of the fear imagery, it asks me, it says, perhaps there's a better way. The way of trusting and relying upon God. And here's the act as if. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we say act as if, act as if, act as if. Not act as if everything's fine. Listen, if you're new and I tell you to act as if, I don't mean tell me you're fine. Fine, I'm fine, fine, fine. How are you? Fine, I'm fine. Are you fine? I'm fine. We're fine, you're fine, I'm fine. That's not what we want to do, all right? We're not interested in you being fine, thank you very much, because we know you're not, because you can't be. If you're under 6 months and you're fine, you're not an alcoholic. I mean, it's that simple. You made a left turn at Albuquerque. But that's not what we mean. We mean, and what would it look like if you trusted God? We know you don't. You have no sober, faithful experience. We know you don't trust God, but perhaps there's a better way, the way of trusting and relying upon God. What would it look like right now, afraid of what you're afraid of, if you really believed God was going to take care of you? What would that look like? I can't do that. I know. But we're going to try. We're going to try. We're going to imagine what it would look like if we trusted and believed in God, and we're going to try and act as if we were people that believed. And what happens is you gain sober experience, and then sometimes you believe, and other times you act as if. I'm 21 years sober, and I got hit with some stuff in the last 4 or 5 months that scared the bejiminy out of me. I mean, really did. Like real stuff. And my sponsor says, what are you going to do? You know, it's a rhetorical question because we know what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to hunker down like a mule and I'm going to act as if God has this one. He goes, do you believe it? I go, no. But I'm going to act as if, you know, and it looks like God's got this one. It's starting to turn around like, you know what? Maybe that not reacting like a lunatic might be helpful. Because you know what has never happened in my life? Right? Picture this, right? I'm afraid of, my wife is doing something that I don't like. Now, it's not that I don't like it, it's that I'm afraid that what she's doing won't be good for me. Right? I'm afraid my wife is going to do something that won't be good for me. Now, I start to get resentful towards her because of how it's going to affect me, right? Kind of work the column back, right? She's going to do something, I don't think I'm going to like how it's going to feel, so I start to get resentful. Now, that happens a lot, right? Never once has this helped, where I slam in the door and go, so what do you think you're going to do that for, you crazy woman? And we have a fight, right? It's never helped. That reaction has only ever caused me pain in my life. And there's no way that I could say that as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, that that is the way someone that trusted and believed in God would react. That's the question. The question for me in my everyday life that I had to learn through step 4 is this. When I'm disturbed, what am I afraid of? And what would a person do that believed in God? Not you, Sheldon. But someone that really believed, not you, Sheldon, but a good member of AA that actually trusted and believed that God was there to help him, to take him by his hand and guide him through his life. What would that person do? And this is where I act as if. And this is the action of faith that I take, that I learn in the imagery of fear. Sexual imagery for me is, well, embarrassingly enough, rather short. Isn't it funny how, like, a lot of times women are embarrassed about their sexual imagery because it's too long and they think it makes them look like a certain type of girl, and guys are embarrassed by it because it's just pass me a matchbook and I'll write it twice. I'm just saying. The book says we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't, right? We're all Nobody has ever showed up at AA and gone, listen, I got problems at work. I got problems with my parents. I got criminal, but sexually I'm fine. I'm pretty proud of my behavior sexually. Everywhere else I'm a disaster, but sexually we don't need to write anything about that. But we write this sex inventory. Why? Because if you want to get me resentful, you know, you mess with my money, that's one thing. You mess with the way I look mess with my sex life. Now we got something to talk about. You want to get me frightened, get in that area, right, for crying out loud. My sponsor used to say, it's so funny, Sheldon, that whenever you call me, it's usually either about money or sex. But if it's between midnight and 4 in the morning, it's never about money, right? It's the thing that makes us the craziest. It's where all the areas of self are involved. So we write this list so we can look at how we are in interpersonal relationships. The sex inventory isn't about the act of sex. It's about the emotions that go with it, the way that I react, the way that my judgment and my fear and my angst cause me to feel knotted up inside that will force me back to a drink. See, what I'm trying to do with these steps is a couple of things. 2 things, I think. The first thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sense of what it is that's been going on in my head. Make sense of what it is. Look at it for what it is. And the book says that when I can see it for its insanity, a lot of it disappears. It says, when it talks about writing the list, it says that once we look at this, a lot of these resentments just disappear. But the other thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get some space between, to coin a phrase, between me and me. I'm trying to get some peace in my mind so I can know what to go to God with. And so there can be some quietness for me to go to God. Because that's what this is all about. My sponsor used to say that in early sobriety, or when I have a big resentment, or when I'm terribly afraid, when I've got either in this point in my sobriety, when there's work that needs to be done in step 10 or step 11, where the noise in my head is loud, if God stood on my shoulder with a bullhorn, screaming what my next direction should be, I wouldn't be able to hear him. That what has to happen is the pipe has to be opened and the blockage has to be removed. And the blockage is the bondage of self. God, relieve me from the bondage of self. I have no idea what it is. That's okay. Write a resentment list. You'll see it. That's what this is. This inventory is the description of the bondage of self. So I know what to go to God with in step 6. How am I going to know otherwise? So I try to see this for what it is. Petty judgment, childish fear, angst, me waking up afraid, looking for something to point the fear at, me waking up angry, looking for something to point the anger at. And hopefully I go through this process, and as the book says, I come out the other side of this. I come out the other side in step 5, having shared this with my sponsor, with a feeling and a knowledge I've never had before, which is that I'm like you. I look at all the names on the list and I figure out I'm like them. We're the same. See, I walk into a room and I look around the room and I make a decision. Are you better than me or worse than me? If you're better than me, I know how to treat you. If you're worse than me, I know how to treat you. But I never, ever, ever look at you as the same as me. And hopefully through this experience in step 5 of sharing this stuff and talking about this stuff and looking at this stuff, I can come out the other side knowing the truth. And that is that we are the same. And isn't that what I wanted all along? To feel connected. The one thing every newcomer will tell you is, well, I just feel like I'm separate. We teach them those words, right? But once they've learned the words, they go, yeah, that's me. I feel like I'm separate and a part of it. I don't belong, and I got that hole inside me, and the wind blows through and through, right? We all feel that same disconnected thing. But I spend my life in judgment and angst, separating myself. And hopefully I come out of step 5 with a vision that I am just like everybody. And that they, like ourselves, are sick too, and that I would do the things that they did, and I would behave the way that they behaved, and that I, in their shoes, could feel like and do like, and it's okay. I want to tell you a little story about my dad, and then I'm going to sit down. So my dad is my dad. And he's always going to be my dad, and I let my dad off the hook, and we have this great relationship. He comes, moves to Vegas. We have a great relationship. Turns out that my dad, some of what I had thought about my mom and dad's relationship were true, but the truth was is my dad found a prettier younger girl, and that's why he left. But by then we'd had some connection, and I was able to let that go, and I fell in love with my dad. And he moved to Vegas when he retired to live near us, and he fell in love with my son, his only grandson. And they'd play together, they'd play cars together on the rug, and he was just this great grandfather, not a great grandfather, but an amazing grandfather. Right? But anyway, he was just this good grandfather, and then he goes to England on a trip to visit, and he falls back in love with England, and he realizes what he missed when he left all those years ago, and he met a girl. And him and the girl fell in love, and he fell in love with the girl, he fell in love back with his hometown, and he decided to move back to his hometown, which really hurt me because I'm watching my son now. He's leaving my son's life, and he left me, now he's leaving my son again. And on his way out the door, he got in my pocket for about 40 grand altogether, and that made me mad too. The truth is hurt my son one thing, steal my money, that's a whole nother, right? A whole nother level, right? So my dad leaves, and I hate my dad, and I really hate my dad. And we've had this relationship of closer and apart, because my dad is my dad and I am me. And this isn't some kind of unicorn magic where I forgive my dad and then we hold hands for the rest of our lives. We are people, and our relationships go up and down. There is an ebb and flow, peaks and valleys, and I have to be willing to re-inventory my dad and re-forgive my dad constantly in order for us to have a relationship. But he does this nonsense, and I'm done. And I go to my sponsor, and I tell my sponsor this, you know what? I am done. I hate him. I am never letting him back in my life. And you know what? The fact he took me for all that money, that's your fault. Because you made me make amends to him, and you made me have a relationship with him, and if you hadn't have done that, he wouldn't have picked my pocket, and I think you owe me 40 grand. And I said, I'm never, ever going to have a conversation. I'm not talking to him anymore. He is dead to me. My sponsor said, that's fine. You can do that. It's okay. But if you're going to do that, I want you to be honest about what you're doing. Okay, so your dad's old. He's got 5, maybe 10 more years at the most, and then he's going to die. And you can make him suffer, and you can punish him, and you can cut him out of your life, and you can never talk to him again, and he will suffer for the next 5 years or 10 at the most, and he will die, and you will have punished him. You, however, will live for probably 40 years after that occurrence, and for 40 years you will know that you came from bad blood, that your dad's a piece of crap, you know you kind of like him. You're going to suffer with the guilt and shame and remorse of knowing you're like your dad. You're going to be constantly afraid you're going to turn out like your dad. And every time you hear music, smell smells, see a movie that reminds you of your dad, you're going to be punished with the hate of hating your dad, and you will suffer for 40 years. But if you want to do that, you can, and then you'll die. Your son will live another 40 years, 80 years in total. Your son will be on the planet for probably 80 more years, and for 80 years he'll know that his grandfather was a piece of crap. He'll know that his grandfather was a no-good, rotten son of a bitch, and every time he thinks about his grandfather, he's going to go, oh, that guy was no good. And do you think you'll ever disappoint your son? What do you mean? Do you think that your son will ever be disappointed by you or your actions? Well, I know he will. I mean, come on. I'm a human being that makes mistakes. If I've learned nothing, I've learned that. Yes, I will disappoint my son. What do you want to teach him? Do you want to teach your son that when his father lets him down, he writes him off and throws him out of his life? Or do you want to teach him that you forgive your father no matter what? What lesson do you want to teach the people around you in your life of how they should treat you when you let them down? What is the lesson you want to bring? Because when you disappoint your son, do you want his love and forgiveness? Or do you want his judgment and his hatred? If you want his love and forgiveness, you need to give it to your father, but you can please yourself. I support you no matter what. I know what I got to do. I know what I got to do. I got to let my dad off the hook. I got to let my dad off the hook. I got to make amends to my dad. I just don't know how. I can see the truth by this point in my sobriety. There's my dad never meant to hurt me. He never meant to hurt me. My dad's just a guy that's got some selfishness, and he wanted a good life, and I can't be too mad at him for it. He just wanted to be able to live. And when he made these decisions, he never made them at me. He made them in spite of me. And it wasn't right, but you know what? He did the best. Oh, my God, I said it. He did the best he could with the tools he had at his disposal. Oh, my God. I hate AA, right? But so I knew I had to say that to him, but I didn't want to go to him and go, Dad, you know, you did the best you could with the tools you had. Because it sounds to me like I'm saying, listen, Dad, it's not your fault. You weren't good enough to be my father. And I forgive you because I'm magnanimous and wonderful. So I couldn't say to him, you didn't have the tools, Dad, because that's an insult to him. It's the truth, but it's a mean truth. We're not, rigorously honest, not brutally honest. Brutal honesty is brutal. It's a bad thing. But anyway, might get the call and my dad's dying. And I go visit my dad. And it occurs to me on the plane when I'm flying over there, God gives me the words. And I say to my dad, I say, Pops, I'm really glad you were my father. And he says, what are you talking about? I was a terrible dad. And he was. And he knew it. I mean, there's no secret there. I said, that's not what I mean, Dad. People tell me I have a great sense of humor, Pops. And that's because of your blood in my veins and the way that you've taught me and raised me. We are alike. You know, Mom. Not that funny. And I'm a salesman, and you created that. You taught me the trade, but more than that, it is because I am of you and by you that I have that natural gift and ability, and you honed that ability. My life exists today the way that it does because of every action you have taken towards me, and I love my life, and I am grateful that you are my father, and I want you to know I love you. And he put his head down and he cried. When he looked up, he said to me, son, he goes, I don't know what happens next. I'm dying. And I don't know if I get judged for what I've done. I don't know if it's reincarnation. I don't know if it's the lights out. I don't know what happens. But I do hope that if I get to come back and try this again, I get to become the kind of man I have watched you grow into in Alcoholics Anonymous. And a little 2-year-old boy deep inside of me was healed that day. And a few months later, I held his hand as he took his last breath, and me and my father are fine. When I hear the music and I see the movies and I smell the smells, there's no hate, there's just love and a smile. I will leave you with this thought. Through inventory, and more than inventory, through 6, 7, and amends, but through starting with inventory. Protect and defend the relationships in your life. Protect and defend the upswings in the relationships in your life. Do everything you can to bring love and joy and harmony to your friends and your family. For this is the lesson of Alcoholics Anonymous. Love and tolerance is our code. Find a way to love each other, and it begins with inventory. Thank you for my life.